$10 that your team wins tonight. Do it through a bookmaker, and it's gambling, legal in some states, banned in others, taxed and locked behind an age check. Now make the exact same bet through an app that calls it a financial contract. Suddenly, it's a regulated investment, legal in all 50 states, overseen not by any gambling authority, but by the federal agency that polices the markets for things like wheat and oil. It's the same bet, the same money, the same game. And the only thing that changed was the word stamped on it. That word changed everything: who regulates it, where it's legal, and whether it's taxed as a wager or traded as an asset. This is not a story about whether betting is good or bad. It's a story about what happens when a product's rules are decided by which box it's filed in, and the company gets to pick the box. Here is what actually happened. The company at the center is a trading platform called Kalshi. Since January 2025, it has offered contracts that pay out based on the result of sporting events, which is, in plain terms, betting on games. It listed those contracts by certifying itself that they were financial products, and the federal futures regulator, the CFTC, took no action to stop it. Then the money arrived. Across Kalshi and its rival Polymarket, monthly trading has jumped roughly eightfold in a year, from about $28 billion to around $220 billion. And this year, prediction markets overtook traditional sports betting for the first time. The states noticed the revenue leaving their casinos and sent legal warnings. Kalshi sued back, arguing that federal law overrides state gambling rules, and the courts have split down the middle. In April, a federal appeals court sided with the platform. This July, a court in New York sided with the states. Two courts looked at the same question and reached opposite answers, which usually means only one place can settle it: the Supreme Court. To see the design underneath, forget betting for a moment and picture a parcel at customs. If it's labeled a gift, one set of rules applies. If it's labeled goods for sale, a different set applies, different taxes, different limits. The parcel is the same either way. The label decides its fate. Financial products work the same way, and here is the crucial part. For these contracts, the company gets to write its own label. Under a rule called self-certification, a registered exchange can launch a new product simply by certifying itself that the product is a legitimate financial contract. The regulator can object, but if it stays quiet, the label sticks. And for over a year, the regulator stayed quiet. So the platform placed its own bet into the box marked financial swap, a category built for traders hedging prices, not for bettors. That single word pulls it into the orbit of the futures regulator, an agency Congress gave exclusive authority over such contracts. And exclusive turns out to be a powerful word. Because the futures regulator's authority is exclusive, courts have found it can knock out the gambling laws of all 50 states at once. So the entity being regulated effectively chose its own regulator, and reasonably chose the one with the lightest touch and the widest reach. Now comes the part that turns a labeling quirk into a real fault line. That word exclusive comes from a law written to organize the derivatives markets, the futures and swaps that let farmers and airlines lock in prices. Congress gave the futures regulator exclusive authority there for a sensible reason, so that a single national market wouldn't be pulled apart by 50 different state rulebooks. It was meant to remove overlap, but a clause built to prevent chaos in wheat and oil is now being aimed at sports bets. And when you point it there, exclusive stops meaning no overlap and starts meaning state law does not apply. Courts call this preemption, federal law overriding state law in a field Congress has claimed. Applied here, it switches off gambling rules the states have enforced for generations. The counter argument is just as old. Courts have long held a presumption against preemption in areas states have always governed, and gambling, like health and public safety, is one of those areas. So which wins, the exclusive federal clause or the traditional state power? That is precisely the question the courts can't agree on. And notice who stands where, because it defies the usual script. The federal government, its Justice Department, and the futures regulator has sued to defend the platforms and strike down state law. The states lining up against them are red and blue alike. This isn't left versus right. It's the center versus the states, and the seam runs straight through the statute. So what would a system look like that doesn't let the label decide? 3 real designs, and when, as always, none is free. The first is to regulate by what a product does, not what it's called. This principle even has a name that regulators repeat like a mantra. Same activity, same risk, same rules. If 2 things are economically the same bet, carrying the same risk, they should face the same rule book, whether one calls itself a wager and the other a swap. The global body that coordinates financial regulators has adopted exactly this language for crypto. The honest problem is that the mantra is vaguer than it sounds. Deciding when 2 products really are the same activity with the same risk is itself a judgment call. And as critics point out, the principle tells you to treat like things alike without telling you which rules to actually apply. The second design is to stop leaving it to chance and draw the line by statute. Congress could amend the law to define an event contract precisely and mark exactly where a derivative ends and a bet begins, so the boundary is set by lawmakers, not by a company certifying its own product. The cost is real. Lawmaking is slow and political, especially when states stand to lose casino revenue. A bright line drawn today can freeze a product that's still changing fast, and whoever wins the right to regulate it shapes the whole market. Its taxes, its protections, who's allowed in. The third design already exists across the Atlantic. Britain faced a near-identical puzzle with financial spread betting, which is structurally betting. Rather than leave it to labels, Parliament wrote the answer into law. It lifted financial spread betting out of the gambling regulator's hands and placed it under the financial regulator with real guardrails like caps on how much people can borrow to bet. The boundary is drawn by statute on whether the underlying event is financial, not by the seller. The cost is a lasting oddity. The taxman still treats it as gambling while the financial regulator treats it as finance, and arguments over which events count as financial never fully went away. Those are the 3 designs. Judge a product by what it does, draw the line in statute, or carve the category out by law. Each moves the decision away from the label, and each trades speed, simplicity, or settled turf to get there. So, go back to the 2 slips. They are word for word identical. The same $10 on the same game at the same odds. Everything that differs between them, the regulator, the map of where it's legal, the tax, the age gate, flows from a single word someone chose to stamp on top. That's the quiet machinery under a $200 billion market, not a verdict on whether the bet is wise, but a question the law never cleanly answered. When a new product can be filed in more than one box, who gets to choose the box? And should the answer really be the person selling it? The market has already grown faster than the courts can decide. The open question is whether we set the rule by what a thing is or by what we agree to call it.